Thank you, Sarah, for that lovely introduction, and Reverend Norris for that beautiful, beautiful prayer. I'm sure we all sent it up with great feeling. And I appreciate so many of you being here. Apart from media audiences, this is the largest group I've ever spoken to since the book came out, and I'm just stunned. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. And of course, extremely flattered to add my name to that incredibly impressive roster of previous Forum Club speakers. And I'm sure it's just going to get more impressive after me, though I won't add as much as already there. So it's a great pleasure to be here. As you know, as Sarah mentioned, I've spent the last 2.5 years of my life learning everything I could about Bernie Madoff and his historic fraud, the largest Ponzi scheme in history by any measure. I learned about his father's serial business failures and the insecurity that they bred in the young Madoff family. Anxieties that may have given rise to Madoff's nearly pathological inability to admit failure in his own life. Indeed, on the first of my 2 interviews with him in prison, he refused to even admit that his epic Ponzi scheme had failed. He insisted that he could have kept it going, despite the incredible crisis we all remember from those dark days of 2008. No, he said there were still people eager to invest with him. So, no, he didn't fail at his Ponzi scheme. He simply got tired of the constant tap dance of raising new cash, and he quit. I learned about Madoff's creative reinvention of a very old crime, robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's what the crime was known before an Italian immigrant named Charles Ponzi put his name on it. So these Peter to Paul schemes are old as the hills, but Bernie found a new twist. He used the most remarkable camouflage to conceal this fraud for so long. His computers created the illusion that all the stocks and bonds he was supposed to have were safely stored in Wall Street's central clearinghouse. He kept old letterhead stationery and an old Selectric typewriter, remember those? So that he could create backdated documents that would look legitimate enough to satisfy regulators' questions. He told foreign auditors that he was trading with U.S. banks, and he told U.S. regulators he was trading with foreign banks, knowing that the extra trouble involved in doing those cross-border checks would likely deter further investigation, as unfortunately it did. And I learned firsthand about the devastating human consequences of Madoff's magnetism. Apart from the evaporation of nearly $65 billion that his investors believed they had the day before he was arrested, and almost $18 billion in cash that they collectively have given him and never gotten back, at least 2 investors committed suicide soon after learning about their Madoff losses. Suicide also claimed Madoff's own son, Mark, crushed by the relentless, but in my opinion, baseless suspicion that fell on Madoff's wife and children. And add in all the beloved family homes that had to be sold, the college years that were interrupted, the pension plans that were bankrupted, the charities that were shuttered, the grant recipients who were suddenly shortchanged. The wreckage reached around the world. Did Madoff feel remorse for this? It's the most common question I'm asked. I don't quite know how to answer it because we can never really see into a human soul. But on my first visit with him in prison, I couldn't see it. What I saw was a man in the most well-defended denial I've ever seen, focused entirely on dollars and cents, on how much might be recovered, how much people might have lost, how the process might ultimately turn out in terms of money, unable to see that this was a crime that truly reached Shakespearean proportions, far beyond the capacity of mere money to ever make it right again. My second visit was 2 months after his son Mark had killed himself, on the 2nd anniversary of his father's arrest. I saw then a shattered man. I actually did not recognize him from across a dimly lit room as the man I had seen just 6 months earlier. Was that the beginning of some remorse for Bernie Madoff? Perhaps. I don't know. But certainly, remorse as you or I would measure it may be something that he simply can't accept in his brain just yet. Through my research, I learned about how different this Ponzi schemer, this terribly troubled man, was from others I had met. One of the advantages of being a financial reporter in this day and age is you get to meet a lot of Ponzi schemers. So you have a large kind of population to compare them with. But what made this Ponzi schemer so different was he had this gift for seduction that's unlike the classic Ponzi schemer. The classic Ponzi personality is charismatic, a bon vivant, the guy telling jokes over in the corner, someone who is so eager to persuade you that he is the most interesting, the most fascinating, the most charming person in the room. But Madoff wasn't like that. Madoff was quiet-spoken, low-key, reserved. He made you feel like you were the most fascinating, charming, interesting person in the room. When I interviewed him in prison the first time, I had firsthand experience of this magic touch. He complimented my grasp of market history, my understanding of arcane investment strategies. Clearly, for a few minutes, I felt like the most intelligent, experienced, professional, trustworthy reporter that ever worked, and certainly the best that he'd ever met. I got to tell you, it feels good. It feels good to be the subject of so much admiration until you consider the source. So instead of trying to impress you, Madoff seemed impressed by you, and what could be more seductive than that? Instead of being eager for your business, he seemed utterly indifferent to whether you entrusted him with your money. He didn't care. I mean, he was only managing money as a favor to a few long-term clients and friends. He already had more people trying to invest with him than he wanted to bother with. So go ahead, take your money and your questions to somebody else. But of course you wouldn't, not in the face of that reassuring indifference. It was a remarkable form of emotional jujitsu. People who probably would have been instantly suspicious of the traditional Ponzi personality, institutional investors, due diligence lawyers, federal regulators, were blindsided by Madoff's quiet magnetism and laid-back confidence. And don't fool yourself. I don't. Most likely we would have fallen for it too. I was struck by a wonderful phrase that analyst Pat Huddleston had in a post he made last week called, "If it sounds too good to be true, you're dealing with an amateur." Think about it. Madoff was a pro. He was a pro, one of the best Ponzi schemers in history. But he shared, with all his differences, one essential characteristic with them all. He could make you trust him. He could make you believe he was quite simply a wizard of Wall Street. Please understand this about successful Ponzi schemers. They will always, always seem utterly trustworthy. A shifty-eyed drifter in a cheap suit may commit any number of crimes, but a Ponzi scheme will never be one of them. Because a con artist who cannot quickly earn your unquestioning trust will go into another line of crime, believe me. But perhaps the most helpful thing revealed by Madoff's epic crime, especially for those of us trying to navigate the turbulent financial waters of today, is that we all desperately need a crash course in the care and handling of wizards. We need to think about who they are, how they gain their power, and how we can keep that power from turning into the black magic of Bernie Madoff before we encounter the next Bernie Madoff. You probably know a lot of wizards, even if you don't think of them that way. They're the people who seem a lot like you, only better, far better, smarter, more successful, more engaging, better educated, more cultured, better dressed, just more than we are in every way. Their track record looks like the yellow brick road straight to the Emerald City. With their astonishing mastery of their field, whatever it is, they seem to be operating so far above our own humble efforts as to be almost magical, almost superhuman. And sometimes, the magic is real.